So we spent these last sessions talking about the Guinness history, the Guinness heritage, the good they did, the business decisions they made, and the way they became one of the world's most famous brands, 250 years of Guinness. And we also talked about their amazing benevolent efforts. In fact, that's why I even studied them. I care about beer and business and industries like that to some extent, but mainly I'm fascinated with a company that for 250 years put what would, by today's measurements, be millions and millions and millions of dollars into the poor and took care of their employees. So we come down to the end, and in this final session, I want to introduce to you the 5 Guinness pillars. These are the pillars of Guinness greatness. These are the pillars they say they built upon, the principles that guided them in their decision-making and in the way they built over generations. I'm going to go through them very briefly, and then we'll go back through them in a little bit more detail, and we'll take your questions. So the first one is this. Discern the ways of God for life and business. Now, that may sound odd to some of you because it's kind of a religious, spiritual thing right up front. But remember that Guinness was a company founded basically under the influence of John Wesley, the great Methodist preacher, that Mr. Guinness, the founder, absorbed his social message, absorbed the sense of social obligation, and that's what caused Guinness to be of such impact. And so the challenge became discern God's ways for life and business. Now, it wasn't just something they made up within Guinness. It came actually from a speech that Prince Albert had made, Prince Albert of England, that he had made, in which he said, "Gentlemen, find out the will of God for your day and generation, and then as quickly as possible, get in line." In other words, in our current shorthand, find out what God is doing and get in line with it. Now, how do you do that? I mean, some of you are out there like, I don't want to go to church right now at the end of this conference. I understand. That's not what we're going to do. But you understand, the way they were talking about this, they didn't mean an angel had to appear in your living room. They didn't mean that you had to have some, voice from heaven sound. No. If you believe in God at all, and you look out at your society, and you know anything about his nature and his character from the scriptures or just from his image in your own heart, you know some of the things that God is about in any generation. Is God not about helping to end this plague of suicides amongst our youth? Yes. Isn't God against racism in every generation? Yes. Isn't God about the wealthier humbling themselves a bit and helping the poor in every generation? Yes. We're not asking you to plant churches. The Guinnesses weren't telling you to, turn your company into a church or a Bible study and see production drop. No, their production increased because they took care of their people, but they also believed that they had an obligation as a company to discern the ways of God for life and for business. That is, they said, their most important principle. Their second most important principle was think in terms of generations yet to come. We have a tendency in our age to think in terms of next week, next month, short term. It's why we do the things with debt that we do. It's why we invest the way we do. It's why we build products with a planned obsolescence in them sometimes. But the Guinness has said, think in terms of generations. Measure success in terms of generations yet to come. Don't think in terms of your time or even your grandchildren's time or your great-grandchildren's time. What will your company be? What good will it have done in 100 years? That's how you build a 250-year global brand like Guinness. Then they said this, whatever else you do, do at least one thing very well. How many companies, how many of you would say, I'm a jack of all trade, but master of none? How many of you have said of other companies, they're a mile wide and an inch deep? Man, they make coffee cups and the coffee machines and the knobs on the toilets and the tile for the floor and the cool little aprons that the baristas wear, but they can't make a decent cup of coffee to save their lives. They are a mile wide and an inch deep. The Guinness has said, whatever else you do, do at least one thing very well. They said we might build ships, we might build railroads, we might give money to the poor, we might reconstruct poverty-oriented housing, but we will brew the best beer on the planet. And that's what built their reputation. 2 more. Love this one. Master the facts before you act. master the facts before you act. I love this one. The Guinnesses used to say, they had a phrase, it essentially was, study long, act quickly. In other words, they'd spend a lot of time studying, getting their facts, doing their research, pulling together their information. They would just frustrate people. They'd take a long time to digest information. And then suddenly, 3 in the morning, you'd get a phone call. Do it now. Boom, they'd go. So they considered long and acted quickly, but they knew their facts. They were famous for commissioning massive research projects at a time when that wasn't done. They virtually created the consultancy industries in the UK because they asked so many experts to go full-time just in advising them. So they mastered their facts. And they were careful to distinguish facts from just opinion and information floating around. And it saved them. There are lots of stories of that. We'll talk about them in a minute. And then finally, this is the one I think I appreciate the most given our current economic problems. Invest in those you would have invest in you. There's a great Guinness principle. Please hear this. Edward Cecil, one of their great business heads, said, "You cannot make money from people unless you are willing for people to make money from you." The Guinnesses actually measured success by how well people did who worked for them, who were their contractors. They would host the party that celebrated a company's success if that company was one of their contractors. They measured their success by the prosperity of their employees and how well their parallel companies did. Now think about that. They didn't think in terms of destroying other companies, and they didn't think in terms of, aha, we wrenched a deal, we wrenched work for no money out of our workers. No. You cannot make money from people unless you're willing for people to make money from you. Now, some of these principles turn our modern economic system upside down. Some of these principles almost sound like socialism, a one-company socialism, given the way we think today. But this is what built one of the greatest brands in the world, a beer company that encouraged faith and transformed poverty. So let's dive into these principles and learn how we can live these principles out.